How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Twangola Show. If this is your first time here, then welcome to my page. So today I want to try to give a non-biased and factual breakdown and observation about all the different waves of feminism. What were some negatives, what were some positives, and ultimately how we could make feminism work if we are to retain it. So feminism, it didn't just appear from a vacuum, obviously, and it had different waves. It was never just one thing. A lot of people try to make the argument that feminism is good because this is what it is. Feminism is bad because this is what it is. Let's unpack that a little bit. So there are approximately 4 waves of feminism. The first wave was essentially about basic rights, voting, property ownership, legal recognition, very fundamental things that most people today would agree are necessary for a functioning society. The second wave, I would say, it expanded into workplace rights, so education, challenging traditional gender roles, and this is where you started to see women entering spaces that were traditionally closed off to them. The third wave became more about identity, individuality, and an overall broader inclusion. And it was less about rights and more about expressing yourself as a woman and redefining what it meant to be a woman with feminine traits and characteristics. Now, I think we have this fourth wave of feminism, which I'm trying not to be biased, but I would conclude that it's gone very wrong. It's been heavily influenced by social media, activism, cultural narratives, and this is the version most people are reacting to in a negative way. When people are arguing about feminism, they're often talking about completely different things, and that's why the conversations feel so glib and shallow and disconnected. When we have that foundation in mind about the 4 waves of feminism, we can actually look at what's happened throughout history. On one wave, on one hand, feminism undeniably did a lot of good things. It gained, it gave women the opportunity to have access to education. There were more opportunities to pursue careers, property rights, and an overall legal protection that was granted to them. And that created a massive shift. Before that, women were obviously locked into situations where they couldn't escape. So that was, we saw an overt expression of a financial dependence. We saw unhealthy relationships sometimes. We also saw a good, strong nuclear family. However, that change did give women options and freedom. And options are important because options fundamentally change how a person is going to navigate through life. So from a broader perspective and from a broader national perspective, society did have certain benefits. You expanded the talent pool in a sense. We had more doctors, more lawyers, more entrepreneurs, more innovation, more perspectives. And with somebody like me that focuses on meritocracy and not race or gender, I see that as real progress. However, every large-scale shift comes with consequences, whether intentional or not. The creation of cars was a beautiful thing. It was a great thing, but we've had millions of people that have died as a result of that progression. Now, when you expand the workforce economically, you're going to increase the competition. So more workers means more people competing for the same opportunities. And that in and of itself can contribute to wage stagnation relative to rising costs, which is an inherently negative thing if you look at it through a certain lens. And ultimately, what used to be a 1-income household is now a 2-income necessity. It's not even a choice anymore. And that leads into another effect, increased stress when both partners are working full time, balancing work, relationships, and family. Everything becomes a lot more taxing and a lot more demanding. There's less of an economic incentive to start a family, to have kids. And then there's the rising cost of living, even for the people that don't have kids, which is going to be influenced by that dual income economy. It shifted how market prices looked at things like housing and lifestyle. And you're also going to see, things like delayed marriages, as I said before, lower birth rates, and less time spent at home. These are all trends that have emerged alongside these shifts. And I personally don't like seeing women have to work on their periods, Also, there's been a growing tension between genders. Narratives have become adversarial, framing men and women as opposing forces rather than these biological, cohesive, and complementary, I guess you could say, constructs. There are the cultural pressures. Obviously, women are now expected to excel in careers whilst also maintaining traditional expectations, and that can create a double burden in and of itself. you're going to see an increase in burnout. You're going to see more responsibilities. You're going to see higher expectations. And you're going to see a constant comparison through social media that's all going to contribute to these things. Another point being is that some people will oftentimes bring up abortion. For some, it represents autonomy and choice, and for others, it raises ethical and moral concerns. Regardless of where someone stands, it is undeniably one of the most contentious outcomes tied to modern feminism. There have been 63 million abortions since 1973. There have been 1 billion globally. And to put it into context, with the Black community in particular, the abortion, so the amount of Black people that were obviously killed, depending on how you want to look at that, it's technically killing, it's technically not killing. The number of Black deaths, or, we'll just call it Black deaths, it's equivalent numerically to not only the transatlantic slave trade, but also the King Leopold genocide of the people in the Congo. And since 1973, there have been, if you do that estimate, around 20 to 22 million abortions. So obviously that's a criticism if you're Black and you care about the Black community. But it's not only a criticism for Black people, but it's a criticism for everybody. Now, I'm a little on the fence about abortion. I don't believe in recreational abortions where people have 20 to 30 abortions. I can make certain exceptions in the case of rape or incest, or if it's medically necessary. But abortion and feminism, abortion, or rather feminism, the main thing I don't focus on, or rather the main thing that I focus on with feminism isn't always abortion. It's kind of like how we treat each other nowadays, because I do look at feminism as this thing that was once good, that advocated for equal opportunity and equal fairness. And I still think it has the opportunity to be good, but I think we've diverged from that. And I think we'll ultimately have to conceptualize a completely different term and just maybe call it equality rather than calling it feminism and putting that, subwords, fem before it. Maybe just, equal rights in general should be the overall focus rather than creating these, subdivisions like, Black rights or Black owned businesses or, woman owned this. You know what I mean? That's my personal opinion. So instead of asking if feminism is good or bad, I think the better question is how do we keep the benefits and get rid of as many negatives as we can? So first, we have to keep the focus on choice. Women should be free to pursue careers, family life, or both without pressure in either direction. I think also we need to reduce the adversarial framing between men and women because cooperation, it builds stability. Anything else that's antithetical to that is just going to cause conflict. So all this man-hating and woman-hating and misandry and misogyny, it's got to go. I think there needs to be more of an incentive to have kids. I think we need to also address economic realities. And if society is now going to rely on dual incomes and wages and housing and policies, we need to ultimately make sure that we're in a position where we aren't being at the back end of everything. So we do have to be in a position where we are reducing unrealistic expectations. We have to kind of give each other a little bit of freedom because we aren't in a position where we can really afford to be as traditional as we used to be. So until there's some type of economic change, there's nothing that can be done about that. And we kind of have to be partners in a sense. I still do think the man should be the head of everything. I still think the man should be the provider and the protector. I think as a man, you should be able to change a tire. I think as a man, you should be able to carry your wife if she hurts herself somehow, God forbid. So I do think you still need to be a strong man with stoicism, eudaimonia. And I think you need to enforce that leadership, not through, a deliberate, concerted effort to yell at her or put her down, but just kind of leading by example. But these are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. Can we preserve feminism? Can we change it into something better?